Jonathan, how you doing?
Good, how are you?
Today's the day, huh?
Yeah.
So, what do you think is going to happen when you go in there?
I don't know, maybe nothing. Maybe it'll dawn on some people and there'll be kind of like a look. There might be like a little agitation or some support, or someone will come out of the woodwork and give me a little fist bump or something
Yeah.
and be like, hey man, I like your shirt.
But you're fully prepared for the haters.
Yeah, I don't care.
Yeah.
I like know how I feel.
Are you expecting somebody to maybe ask if you're wearing it sarcastically?
That's a possibility for sure.
All right, let's head in.
Okay.
Have you ever met a liberal who supports Donald Trump? Many assume that all liberals are against him, but there's a growing number of individuals who are breaking the mold. These liberal Trump supporters value his policies on the economy, foreign affairs, and even his bold approach to politics. They don't fit the stereotype, but they're proud of their decision to stand with the president. Despite facing criticism from their peers, these liberal Trump supporters believe in looking at the bigger picture and supporting what they believe is best for the country. It's not about loyalty to a party, but rather about standing up for what they believe is right. So the next time you come across a liberal Trump supporter, don't be quick to judge. They may just surprise you with their reasoning and conviction. Thanks for watching the video, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more thought-provoking content.
All right, so how'd it go?
I thought pretty well.
How many people approached you while you were in the gym?
I think four positive while I was in the gym, and then on the way out, this guy asked me if I was wearing this shirt sarcastically again, or seriously, and I told him seriously. And then we got into a conversation. He was like, he's invested in a lot of these narratives. I told him I don't like Trump personally, and if he could separate himself emotionally from the person and look at the platform and then objectively look at all the content that's put out there, then he'd probably arrive at the same place.
He was pretty respectful.
Very much so, absolutely. And also he's a Jew with a Star of David. I think he's very close to aligning with my views.
He even said at the end, it sounds like you both want the same thing.
Yeah, I rarely have those conversations and appreciate them. It's usually like...
It's a very civil discussion.
100%, yeah.
And he's a well-liked guy around these parts. So that's pretty cool. So the one dissenter you had a pretty productive conversation.
Yeah, like a mild dissenter.
He
We'll get him there by November.
He didn't have terminal Trump derangement syndrome.
No. So I just had my coffee at Intelligentsia here in Abbot Kinney with my Liberals for Trump t-shirt, and on my way in, one guy stopped me who's a liberal and very politely and curiously asked me about my position, and had a nice conversation with him, and he actually told me that I gave him food for thought, which was cool. And then two other people came up to me inside and told me they liked my shirt. Everyone else was I noticed a lot of kind of like double takes and people looking. There was a guy who told me he thought it was funny and that his friends would find themselves in the same position that I find myself in. But overall, kind of inspiring and unexpected.
You know what time it is. Buckle up and enjoy the ride.
Greetings to our loyal WFYL listeners around the world. Welcome to a special edition of the program from Hollywood, California. I want to thank each and every one of you for tuning in once again, because you still have the right to hear and the right to be heard. Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Mike G, and you're participating in Mike G in the Morning with The Law Matters. And you can listen to our program every Friday at 7 a.m. Eastern, only on the Freedom Station, WFYL. So let's be heard. We've got a special guest joining us here today. Jonathan Chaffin is back with us. You are officially our very first repeat offender here in California. Thanks for joining us, Jonathan.
Thanks for having me.
You know, we've got a theme for this particular episode. You told me about an idea that you had in your head. Jonathan's my buddy now. I see him almost every day at the gym. We get to chat it up over there at Gold's Venice. And he had this idea for a t-shirt. So why don't you go ahead and reveal it to the audience members. What do you got there?
It says Liberals for Trump. I had it custom made.
What gave you this idea?
So one night I was kind of bored and was just thinking of ideas for T-shirts that were kind of like objective truths that would be thought-provoking. So I had other ideas for shirts that would maybe cause people to think a little bit about orthodoxies. So like one of them was like, Joe Biden is a racist.
Huh.
Another one was climate change alarmism is a scam.
Wow.
So something that would cause someone to look at it and pause and sort of, maybe produce some kind of critical thinking.
That is strange how a lot of people don't know about the racist statements that Biden has made over the years, right?
Yeah.
And they just sort of get swept under the rug. We had a segment where my co-host back in Philadelphia, Philly Chris, went on to the streets in Center City, Philadelphia, and we had him asking people what they thought about when Trump said X, Y, and Z. And of course, the response was, "Oh, that's totally racist." And it's like, well, would it surprise you that Biden is the one who said that? But he gets a pass for some reason or another. Why is that?
He does. And just, I thought this T-shirt was funny also. It sounds like the name of a punk band or something.
Right.
But I also found that we're at a time, it's such a dire time that the taboo of who Trump is has to be kind of broken for people. I'm not a huge fan of Trump, but I literally think we're at like the beginning of the end of Western civilization and potentially the end of America, and Trump is the only option at this moment. But as far as racism goes, yeah, Joe Biden was like, you ain't black if you don't vote for me.
That's one of the more recent ones. You've also got him saying that he didn't want his kids growing up in a racial jungle, right?
Yeah. He was one of the architects of all the 90s criminal law.
Super predators.
Yeah. And yeah, I find it's absolutely laughable. And then I think some of the things that come up if someone saw this, Trump's a racist and he's like a sex offender or something. I often ask, like, what is the evidence that Trump is a racist? I don't know if he is or not, but I don't have any reason to think that he is.
And that's something that keeps getting perpetuated, though.
Absolutely. There's as far as media coverage, there are two sets of rules for how people are covered and presented. And Trump somehow, who used to be just a celebrity, a host of a show, friends with Oprah Winfrey, he was just kind of like a tacky celebrity, has become, since he entered politics, is now the Antichrist, and like a Ku Klux Klan equivalent. And to wear something like this, liberals for Trump, which is such a like cognitive dissonance, I think, for so many people. Yeah, it's absurd what he represents and has become, and I wish the embodiment of his platform politically were different. It would make things much easier if it were like Vivek or someone else who's much more palatable and presents themselves differently. I'm not a huge fan of Trump's of his bluster. He can sometimes be funny, but also gets himself into trouble. I find myself, being put off by, he said something about Nikki Haley's husband, who's a National Guardsman who is deployed abroad. He shouldn't say things like that. I don't agree with them.
And this is coming from somebody who I presume does not appreciate Nikki Haley for her politics.
No,
right?
not at all. But also don't appreciate anyone making a remark or a judgment of someone who's serving the country honorably.
And similar to the McCain thing back in 2016?
Yeah. Yeah, similarly, I don't think Trump or any politician for that matter has a right to do that. And I think on the subject of Biden, it's interesting how another thing that often comes up, and this is among my circle, because the subject of Trump is taboo to begin with. So I'd like to at least engage people in conversation about normalizing some kind of discussion about him as a viable political candidate. But he's often portrayed as, he's this awful narcissist. He can't be in charge of this country. He's unpredictable. He doesn't care about people. And Joe Biden is like this, and supposedly this empathic grandfather character, just, a wonderful empath of a human being. I think he's actually like a nasty piece of work. And he's done several things when it comes to our military and people who have served. He repeatedly mentions his son, who tragically died of brain cancer, not while serving. He did not die in combat. And he did, I remember after those Marines were killed in Afghanistan during that debacle of a withdrawal, he went with Dr. Jill and to meet the families and to receive the bodies, which is an honorable thing to do. And he was caught looking at his watch, like bored, bored and wanted to get out of there. And then some of the parents of those Marines that were killed who wanted to talk about their kids and, meet the president, he immediately started talking about his own son and talked over them. And I think that's like the most narcissistic. It's so disgusting. It's not a person who has empathy when you talk about yourself when someone else is going through something.
Yeah, that's a tough situation, right?
Yeah. And Trump's narcissism, I don't mind it because I believe he wants to win, and his objective is to represent the people, for the economy to be good. I think he thinks of himself as a business person and a CEO who's judged on numbers and performance, and whether he's doing that for himself or for the American people. If the outcome is correct, and I agree with his platform, then I'm okay with that kind of narcissism.
So you voted for Obama back in the
Twice.
day, right? Voted for Obama twice, and then Trump twice, or?
I didn't vote in the 2016 election because I was living in, I was in California at the time. Actually, no, I was in New York. I could not bring myself to vote for Hillary Clinton. I just was repulsed by her, just her way of being. But at the same time, I did not support Trump. When he was elected, I was horrified and embarrassed.
Really?
That he was elected. I thought it was like the darkest day for America. What would the rest of the world think of us? We elected this like total moron who's beneath the dignity of the office of president, and that he would be dangerous, unpredictable, and that the world would become dangerous and he would run the country into the ground.
So why did you think that at the time?
He just wasn't, it sounds stupid to say now. He wasn't an established politician or an establishment politician, which now I find like a totally ridiculous attribute for someone as a to determine if they'll be successful or not.
Sure. As a matter of fact, that's what makes him attractive to a lot of
It
people.
absolutely 100%. Like I was thinking about, I was watching that thing with Bill Maher talking about Gavin Newsom, the governor of California, who's like his buddy.
He's a real winner.
Yeah, he's like, I like the guy. I know him personally. He's great. And he was challenged on it. And Gavin Newsom has like run this state into the ground. There was a $30 billion surplus, and now there's a $70 billion deficit. The only thing that keeps this place going is the fact that it's a beautiful state with wonderful resources. And aside from all of the horrible administration, it's a nice place to live. But if that person, Gavin Newsom, these people are like unemployable in the private sector. If you had the CEO of a company who the revenue was $30 billion, and then the next year it was negative 70, like a 300% turn, that person would be fired immediately and would not be able to find a job elsewhere.
That was the
And
interesting
now
part
this
of it.
now this person is being talked about as a replacement for Joe Biden to be the president, the Democrat nominee,
Right.
the leader of the free world, like a flunky.
He says he doesn't want it. He's also very close with China, right? Rolls out the red carpet for China.
Yeah, they cleaned up San Francisco, not for the citizens of San Francisco, but when she came to town overnight, everything was cleaned up, CCP flags everywhere. That's like a little microcosm of, I feel like, the moment we're in, where the left represents ideology, and the right, if you even want to call it that, I don't even think of that anymore, but the kind of MAGA faction of the Republican Party actually represents people's interests, like the constituents' interests.
Yeah, and for a long time, it was seen the other way around, right? Democrats, the party, the little guy, right?
Yeah.
And that seems to have changed. I will say about the Marr conversation, that's the episode where he spoke with Patrick Bet-David.
Exactly. Yeah.
And Bet-David was grilling him on this
Yeah.
stuff, asking him very simple and fair questions about it, and just asking him to get into details as to why Bill believes him to be a winner. And he really wasn't able to provide anything
No.
of substance, unfortunately. And I thought it was a very intellectually dishonest conversation on Marr's part. Now, don't get me wrong. For somebody with whom I disagree with politically on many, many things, I respect Marr to a degree that, number one, I think he's funny and witty. There are some comedians who will go out there and their whole gig is Republicans are stupid, right? He doesn't like Republicans, but he's witty with the way he goes about making his jokes. I can respect his jokes as witty, even if I disagree with the principle. And he fancies himself an intellectual guy, right? He's always talks a big game when it comes to that stuff. But when he was confronted to get more specific on as to why he believed Newsom was a winner, he wasn't able to provide anything, and he got extremely flustered
Yeah.
and frankly rude, and then changed the topic. And he wouldn't accept that from somebody who was supporting somebody on the right, would he?
No, absolutely not.
If they were sitting on his program and somebody said that they liked Trump, for example, or some other person on the right, and he started asking them very basic questions, how is he a winner? And the person couldn't provide any type of a coherent response,
Yeah, there would be the punchline.
they would be the punchline. They'd be laughed out of the building.
I thought that was indicative of people like Bill Maher, who I also think is witty and funny and smart, but still is in this bubble. And in that segment, he just got lazy and kind of agitated and was like, well, enough. Okay. You know, like, I'm above explaining myself on this. I don't have to give you any statistics to back up why I think Gavin Newsom would be a good candidate for president.
Yeah.
I know him. Just trust me. And I feel like that's the kind of elite attitude of just like, we should kind of be in charge and we know better for everybody.
So, at what point did you realize, after being horrified that Trump was the president and you heard all of these things and had this sense that, we were going to be in trouble, at what point did you realize, hey, this isn't exactly what they said it was going to be?
So I think it was after, I still remember when Trump had the phone call with Ukraine asking for Hunter Biden to be investigated and withholding aid and being caught. That was the first impeachment.
Gotcha.
Which turned out to be, he was actually correct in asking them to investigate Hunter Biden and Joe because they were compromised by Burisma. But after that, there was a documentary I saw about the 2016 election and the spying on members of Trump's campaign and the proliferation of this Russia stuff. And that dawned on me, just as a person who believes in free speech and democracy, that outside of politics or partisanship, that is totally unacceptable and undemocratic. And if we're using the excuse of Trump, that he's such an evil, that this behavior is justified, that democracy should be subverted, then there's a huge problem in this country. And to see people who were so emotionally riled by the figure of Trump to the point that they suspended their belief, and still have, in democracy and a free and open society, in order to remove him because they don't like the results of an election or believe that this figure is so dangerous. That was the first thing that hit me. I was like, oh, these people are throwing democracy out the window. This is what the basis for everything. If this is tarnished, then you can forget it. This just becomes like...
And what about it in specific got you there? Was it the fact that they were using a fake dossier that was put together? Or?
The fake dossier, the entrapment on Mike Flynn when he had that phone call, which is customary before they actually took office, when he was interviewed by those two agents. It was just obviously the American security state trying to undermine a candidacy for president, and then his actual administration after he was elected.
What did that feel like when you started to get the sense that maybe I was wrong about this? Was that tough? Because I see a lot of people who, regardless of whether or not they're starting to see the truth, they don't want to admit it out loud. They don't want to admit to themselves that maybe I didn't have this right.
Yeah. Well, Trump makes that realization difficult because of the way he behaves, and he's like he's an ogre of a character, and he's crude and vulgar, and to a certain crowd, it's difficult to, you have to be super objective and remove, I guess people call it Trump derangement syndrome, but you have to remove emotion from the equation, look at the facts objectively, and then decide what your opinion is, which is how I was taught to think. But that realization, it took a little bit of time, but then you start to it started with Russia, then I went back to the phone call with Ukraine, and there were a few other things, and you're like, I have a very good friend of mine who sort of opened my eyes, I would say, who I would challenge on all of this stuff, and we just go back and forth, and he would send me material, and then over time I sort of came to this realization, but I'm not I know I'm wearing this t-shirt, I'm not a Trump sycophant. I don't think he's this incredible figure, but it's what we need now. It's so bizarre. It's 10 years ago, if someone was we need Donald Trump to win the American presidential election in order to save Western civilization. It's a B movie or something.
Yeah, that's interesting, because I will admit that when I saw him talking leading up to 2012, and he was in New Hampshire giving some kind of speech, he was probably just testing the waters to see if a run...
2012 or 2016?
2012. 2012. So it was leading up to 2012. It might have been in 2011 at that point. He was just testing the waters. And I saw him give a speech, and I thought to myself, this guy is something different when he's talking about how China's manipulating their currency, and he's going to be the one who does something about it if I run, and then when I win, sort of thing. And you'd mention it to people, though, and as you're saying, that's ridiculous. That's totally ridiculous.
It was a PR stunt. That's what I thought it was.
Yeah.
It was oh, this guy's going to run for president. He'll get media impressions and make himself more relevant, and there'll be money on the back of this. And
he was
it's not
saying
serious.
things that nobody else was saying that did make sense at the time, though.
Totally.
Yeah. But because of, I guess, you're saying, the presentation, which for some people was his greatest attribute in their opinion, and for others it just put them off because he wasn't what we're used to seeing. But in many respects, I think you could say that what we're used to seeing is not all good, right? When people are fake and phony and everything like that.
Yeah, the authenticity in authenticity in anything is what everyone wants. So in a way, he's like, he's this incredible disruptor. You can listen to him, who just he doesn't need notes to speak.
Right.
He doesn't have talking points. And then you look at these other guys that are just like, everyone is completely controlled. There's a fake virtuosity to them in the way that they present themselves. And it's just, it doesn't resonate. But I remember also there was a moment, I was here in LA, would have been in like 2015 or 2016. I was listening to an NPR radio report about Trump during his campaign, and he was talking about building the wall. And all of these people were chanting in the background. I don't know where this rally was, but they were chanting like, build the wall, build the wall. And I'm listening to this and I'm like, oh my God, these like stupid racists, like wherever this is like ridiculous and kind of scary. And then you fast forward to today, where we have pretty much an open border. We have millions of people entering the country every year that the system cannot handle, and are basically, I think it's being done on purpose to bring in voters. But you fast forward and you see the image of those cops getting beaten up in New York City by those migrants. There were 6 or 7 of them. They arrested 4 of them the next day, or not even the next day. They're let out, no consequence, and the guy's flipping the double bird to the media. It's like that image is, somebody posted on Twitter, I think it was, or X, I think it was Mike Cernovich. It was like, this or Trump. And I think that's right. It's
You
like,
think that's what it comes
this
down
or
to?
Trump. And the way I thought about this before was like, oh, this is just racism. Like Trump is just pandering to these racists. He doesn't believe this stuff himself. But when you actually look at the issue and how it's unfolded, he was absolutely correct about it. And it has nothing to do with racism. It's everything to do with policy and actually a humane solution to a problem.
So why did you think that border security wasn't an issue back then? Because you often hear people say, "Oh, you're racist if you say that," because most people that come in legally and they overstay their visa, they're not coming through with a wall.
I think I was manipulated of this, like the way that Donald Trump's idea is that, first of all, the media would be presented as like any of this is ludicrous. Like if you read the New York Times, it's like Donald Trump is going to wants to build a wall. Like what a joke. And then is it really? Like I think Mexico has a wall to their southern border, and every other country in Central America has a secure border. And then also what's happened is that immigration has gotten so totally out of control that it is impacting everyone's lives.
We're talking about illegal immigration.
Illegal
right?
immigration.
So that's an old habit that you're having a hard time dropping right there.
Yeah.
I'm going to say this because when you talk to people on the left, my biggest frustration is that they make no distinction whatsoever between immigration and illegal immigration.
Correct.
So they always turn the conversation to immigration when we're having a conversation about illegal immigration.
Yes.
It's like the difference between robbing a bank and filling out a withdrawal slip and giving it to the teller.
Yes.
One's illegal, one's part of a lawful process, and they're two different conversations.
Yeah. And that, to highlight another example in which this is totally upside down, is that being for, let's call it, controlling immigration and being against illegal immigration, that was like a Bernie Sanders talking point 10 years ago. That was
Really?
like bringing illegal immigrants in undercut the wages of hardworking Americans and are going to take jobs from hardworking Americans. And now this is completely upside down. That's Trump's, that's his point. So this is how far Trump's platform, if you remove the man from the platform, is like it's pretty centrist. So it's completely upside down, and the Democrats or the left or whatever you want to call them, they don't represent working class people anymore. They represent open borders and cheap labor for corporations, which is what a lot of this illegal mass immigration is.
Well, is there a downside as far as security goes?
Oh my God! Like,
You're letting military-aged males.
yeah, I think there were 20,000 Chinese in the last month, and then all of these people from the Middle East, like military-aged males from the Middle East. Like, I'm certain that there are Hamas, Hezbollah, tons of Chinese operatives in this country. We don't know who any of them are. They've walked across the border. It's a complete dereliction of the responsibility of the president and the administration. It's a disaster.
It's almost like, how could there not be, though, right? If you have all these other people coming across, and it's well known at this point, people are jumping up and down screaming about it on the right, and people on the left are saying, we shouldn't do anything about it. It would be foolish for people who want to harm our country to not take advantage of that.
Of
wouldn't it?
course,
You'd
it's
have
an
to think that
invitation.
They're totally foolish. And when I say that people on the left don't want to do anything about it, I hear a lot lately about how it was the Republicans who stood in the way of giving the president the opportunity to do something about illegal immigration and controlling the border,
Yeah.
because they couldn't agree on a vote, which is one of the most disingenuous claims I've heard in a
So-
very long time, because what they do with these bills, obviously, is they stuff other things in there to which they know you will be objectionable, right? You'll object to them. It's almost as if I say, hey, with this bill, we're going to give homes to every homeless person in the country. Now, also in this bill, we're going to kill a puppy for every home we give away. Do you agree? And you say, no, I don't want to kill puppies. And I go out there and say, he's not letting the homeless people get houses.
Yeah. Well, in this specific bill, first of all, in my opinion, there's no need for a bill. You just have to enforce the law.
The existing law.
There is no deal. We don't have to make a deal to make this country secure. It's a responsibility. So that's number one. And number two is the lion's share of that bill was funding for Ukraine. It's like the whole thing plus a little bit of border stuff. It's a total outrage. And Mitch McConnell had somebody else like take the fall for it. But yeah, I just see these guys now. I don't even see a Republican and a Democrat party. I see a ruling class of these careerists that are super corrupt, that don't have the interests of the American people at all. And I think previously they would line their pockets, but at the end of the day would sort of figure out what was right and move forward. And I feel like recently, in the last 10 or 15 years, their transgressions have impacted people on personally to the point that this is it's unavoidable, that this cannot continue.
So let's go back to when you're ultimately, I don't want to say changing teams, but you're realizing that maybe you weren't 100% right about everything on the whole Trump thing. This guy who's sending you these different articles, was he somebody who was right-leaning or conservative, or was he
No.
too somebody on the left who decided Trump is a better option?
He was on the left, for sure.
You
Super
lived in-
educated, smart guy, and he was very way ahead of the game. I think I mentioned the last time I thought he was having a personal crisis or something, or had lost his mind and was a QAnon something or other. But nothing could be further from the truth.
I did meet a lot of people like that in 2016 who were Democrats who have decided that they were voting for Trump because they thought he was onto something. One of them actually ran Democrat campaigns, was very big politically, and said, Trump's tapped into a different vein in this country. And when you think about it, he is not a traditional conservative, right?
No, he was a Democrat before.
He some would argue he still is a Democrat,
Yeah.
just not the Democrat of today, because it seems to be entirely different than it used to be. I won't even say going back to Kennedy, right? Because a Democrat from 2012 is different than a Democrat from today. You lived in New York for how long?
13 years.
And living in New York for that long, you don't hear Trump when he's brash and everything like that. And thank God that's just a New York guy talking trash. Because as
Of
somebody who
course.
grew up there,
Yeah.
a lot of that stuff, it's almost like it doesn't even register with me that this is inappropriate.
Yeah.
It doesn't even hit it. It's like when you hear the white noise machine, you stop noticing it at all.
But I think among whatever you want to call them, the elite, whatever, he's a barbarian that doesn't belong inside the gates of the establishment. He doesn't belong in the Oval Office.
No, I can
New York
see
is
that.
full of people like Trump that are blustery billionaires that are kind of funny and like, yeah. But it's a taboo for someone like that to be in the Oval Office. He's
Okay.
he's an ogre, you know?
Okay, so it's not that his behavior was so shocking in and of itself. It was shocking in that particular context.
I believe, yeah.
I'm used to seeing this. I'm just not used to seeing it here. Is that what it was?
If Trump wants to have his TV show The Apprentice and like go to MMA fights and do that, you know, for the plebs, the common people, then like that's one thing. But, you know, President of the United States, that's for someone like Obama,
Gotcha.
who presents himself in a certain way and is revered in certain circles, but actually turned out to be like a far more, I think, disappointing character.
Were there any other policy issues between 2016 and 2020 that were being pushed by the left, perhaps, or not being accepted by the left that led you to think, I don't know if I'm on this team anymore. I don't know if I want to vote for that side in this upcoming election?
No, the opposite. I was like so committed on election night. I was like so thrilled because it looked like Trump was going to win the election
Okay.
in 2020. And at, I don't know what time it was, but in the middle of the night, the counting stopped and Wisconsin, Michigan, Arizona had been called already, like before the polls, you know, in the afternoon Pacific time. And it just flipped like that. But Joe Biden basically didn't, it was Trump against himself. Like Biden stayed in his basement. He
Right. Do
practically
you
didn't
want
campaign.
Trump or do you want somebody other than Trump? And that was it.
It was basically, are you put off enough by Trump? Like,
Right.
what would you vote for him or not?
Yeah.
Even though the economy has been amazing, there's been peace in the Middle East. Things are very good in the country, but still the figure that is projected of Trump was what I think did him in.
I think I perhaps misstated my question. What I was saying is, other than something like the dossier and the spying on the Trump campaign and them jamming up Michael Flynn and continuing to do it to
Yeah.
many people surrounding, was there anything else as far as policy is concerned?
Oh, yeah.
That led you in that direction?
All of the DEI stuff
Okay.
making its way into every aspect of life and institution and basically ruining our society. All of the ESG and energy policy of the country. I mean, I've become aware of all of these things. The DEI stuff, I think, is like the most fundamental, rotting thing that's happening that is destroying society. It's like the end of a merit-based society.
What about it?
Well, I mean, it's funny, I used to use the example when I just believe that this should be a meritocracy. We have equality by law. I don't believe in equity, which is when you have, you're guaranteeing outcomes for people based on their external characteristics to the world. and is basically another form of racism or Marxism or whatever, a combination of the two. But I used to use the example like, who would you like flying the plane that you're on? Would you like the best person for the job, no matter what they look like or what they like to do in their personal life?
Yeah.
Or do you want to have like a matrix of different peoples and cherry pick from underrepresented groups for the person who is holding your life in their hands? And now we're actually at the point where airlines in this country have implemented those policies and are not pure meritocracies. So,
Caden, I want to bring you in on this because you're from the younger generation.
All right.
So, when you were in school, because this wasn't all that long ago, you were in high school, right?
Yeah. 2018, graduated high school.
So I hear this DEI stuff, and for an old man like myself who owns my own business and doesn't have to be in a corporation or anything like that, I don't know too much about it. Was this stuff being taught in school when you were in high school?
Oh, not at all.
Oh, okay.
DEI, what was the other abbreviation you said? 3 letters? But I don't think
ESG,
ESG.
Environmental Social Governance. That's
Yeah.
what ESG is, right?
mm-hmm.
Yeah, no, nothing like that in school.
So this is very, very fresh and new. Do you know what we're talking about when we say that, or?
I'm going to say not really. I mean, yeah, maybe if you want to give a rundown of roughly what it is, I might know some more of the specifics, but overall, probably not.
So I think one of the good examples is the Harvard case, where Harvard was sued by a group of Asian students who didn't get in and were being discriminated against because they were using racial quotas for their admissions policy.
Right.
So, and then it kind of carried on and was exposed with this thing with Claudine Gay, the president of Harvard. But yeah, the idea that basically by way of affirmative action and choosing people for jobs or positions in institutions based on their immutable characteristics rather than their merit.
And Kate, you're of mixed race yourself, right?
Yeah.
Did any of this pop up when you were in school?
I never really noticed it personally. I mean, that sounds to me, I've heard definitely some discussions on like affirmative action and things like that, but no, going into college, being in school, it never really impacted me personally.
You did it the old-fashioned way.
Yeah.
What about critical race theory? Did that ever come up?
No, that was, I think, might have been some courses that they offered in college for that by the time I went in, but nothing in like high school or below that.
Did you take any courses in college about any of that stuff? Like,
Yeah,
whether it's race or gender studies? I got
was
stuck in this masculinities course in college. It was horrible.
I was a history major, so I took like, I didn't take gender studies. I took an African American history course, which was great my freshman year. And I was just thinking of another example of this when literally this week I was at a work conference and talking to one of the guys that arranged the conference about speaking slots on panels for the next conference that they were doing. And we're talking about an executive from our company, and he's like, well, also the diversity thing. I was like, what do you mean? It's like, well, he's a white male, so it's going to be tough to get him on a panel. And I just thought, I was really shocked because I hadn't seen this like out in the wild. And then this guy walked up who was the founder of a very big and successful company. He was an African-American guy. And they started chatting, and he was like, well, the next one's in Florida. The next event is in Florida. And
So white guys are allowed in Florida?
Yeah. Well, the CEO of this, the founder of this company was like, oh my God, we'll have to it'll have to be a quick trip and, going to Florida. What's that going to be like?
It's gonna be like Vietnam. That's what it's gonna be.
Yeah.
Like. How will you survive? in
This
Florida?
I just thought I just find it like so insane.
That's funny. So the DEI stuff. Did you start to see that in the business world that you were being forbidden certain opportunities or precluded from certain
I
opportunities?
was, yeah, I've come across, like, there was someone I spoke to, it was probably 5 years ago, about a potential job, and the guy was like, listen, they're going to hire, like, this is going to be like a diversity hire, so just, just forget it. So, yeah, I'm just against it I believe in, like, meritocracy and human thriving.
Yeah.
Across the board. I know that people are discriminated against. I know that there's racism in this country. I don't dispute any of that.
Sure. But the goal should be to get rid of that and not make things unfair in general as a result.
100%. You're just
Right.
creating, like, more racism of another sort by having quotas.
And one of the problems with that is when you implement these kinds of systems, it really diminishes the accomplishments of minorities who do achieve certain things, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
Because you always have that asterisk in the back of people's minds that, was this a diversity hire? Did this person not earn this 100%? Which is
It's-
sad. I don't know. I think it's almost belittling these people. Don't
It's
you?
infantilizing.
Yeah.
And it's a very left-wing thing. Like, I keep seeing this thing on Twitter of Morgan Freeman on 60 Minutes when Mike Wallace is asking him about African American History Month. And he's like, I don't want it. Like, I don't need that.
Yeah, would you
I'm an
want your
American.
history to be
He
in a
asked Mike
month?
Wallace, he was
Yeah.
like, do you want a Jewish History Month? And he's like, oh, God, no. I don't,
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
I had a guy who was running for Congress on the program a few months back, and he's an African American guy, and he was saying that with the left you see the soft bigotry of low expectations. And he was talking about how people on the left will say that the voter ID laws are racist.
Yeah.
But could you imagine saying that to somebody's face, going up to an African American person and saying, do you know how to get an ID?
Yeah.
Like,
do you
what'd
have
you
an
say?
ID? African and black people don't have Wi-Fi. Don't you know that?
That was another Biden
It's like,
thing, right?
these people are, like, disgusting.
Yeah. Yeah, it's an insult to people's intelligence, unfortunately.
It is.
All right, so we've got so far the illegal immigration thing put you off, the spying thing put you off, the DEI that we're seeing in general put you
Yeah,
off.
this woke insanity, generally, not just with in applications for jobs and so forth, and universities and institutions, but the erasure of history, the tearing down of statues, which is the beginning of a cultural revolution, where people think that they're, like, at the end of history or something. Which is always the beginning of danger.
Oh,
So, all during the BLM riots, which was another thing that this is, like, very taboo, but I believed it at the time, and I still believe it now. I watched the 9-minute video of George Floyd, and I watched it again in Candace Owens' documentary, and my belief is that he died of a fentanyl overdose, and followed the trial, and think that Derek Chauvin was unfairly convicted.
yeah, that's
and-
certainly a controversial.
It is, but I don't know if Derek Chauvin is a racist or not. I don't know what's in his heart.
That's an entirely separate issue, right? Whether or not the cause of death was homicide.
Did you watch the 9-minute footage?
No.
So here's the thing. I was talking to somebody at the dog park about this.
Oh no! You know where this is
yeah.
going, Caden, right?
And I was just thinking, I was, like, looking around the thing. I'm like, I bet you if you polled every person here, they would have the strongest opinion about this issue. And I bet you none of them have watched the entirety of the incident. So imagine that. You have like, you're so invested in an opinion on something, and you've outsourced your opinion to something else because you haven't looked at it. So it seems very clear that I don't know how deep we want to go into this, but when he's bidding, he's already overdosing when they have him in the police car and like calling for his mother, and then it was presented in the media that he was, he was like basically being strangled to death. It very much and then there was the information that came out about the autopsy and the pressure that was put on the doctor at the end for the findings. So I don't know 100%, but that's certainly
the
what it
drugs
seemed
in
to
his
me.
system were in the documentation during the trial. They had that information. Whether or not there was pressure on the jury to go.
Well, when the president of the United States wades in
Yeah.
before a jury deliberation to do the right thing, that's another just a horrific thing for a president to do. You stay out of this. Is the justice system of this country. Everyone has a right to a fair trial without the interference or influence from the president of the country. Everyone else would, historically, Paul, you would stay out of it and allow justice to take its course, but he weighed in before the jury deliberations. Like, imagine I think every juror on that, like, how could you not convict the guy?
You did mention something that I want to go back to when you talked about you don't know if that guy is a racist.
Yeah.
Right? And I think that's a completely separate issue as to whether or not he's a murderer. Because he could be a murderer.
Sure.
And still not be a racist.
But the narrative, the reason I was making that point is because that video was presented, it went viral, and caused this incredible visceral response among the populace that was locked down during COVID. And it turns out that event is actually a statistical, it's so tiny statistically for a black person to be murdered at the hands of police. Something like under 10 people in a year. And every one of those is a tragedy, don't get me wrong. But it was presented as if this is like an epidemic in this country. It's not. And actually, this story just came out. Heather McDonald actually reported on this when it happened. And it was very unpopular. And she's a conservative commentator who no one on the left would listen to, but she was right at the time. Was that this Harvard professor, Roland Fryer, he's a black economist who did a study on this very occurrence of unarmed blacks being killed by cops, and had one team of research assistants for a year comb through the data, and it was like a tiny number. He had another group after a year, had another group rerun the same data, unrelated, so that he would be absolutely certain about it, and was then suspended for 2 years from Harvard by Claudine Gay, who is now no longer the president of Harvard. But to arrive his data, like looking at actual data from the FBI and the Washington Post's database, this is what he arrived at. And this was the case during George Floyd, but this was allowed to just become a narrative that overtook like the collective consciousness of the country that is not representative of what's actually happening on the ground.
Well, that's really what I was getting at, because if you have these statistics where, more whites, for example, are being killed by police in these circumstances, then ultimately, whether or not that cop is a murderer is separate and distinct from whether he's a racist.
Yes.
And I asked a friend of mine who's a Democrat attorney about this. I said, do you know for a fact that that guy's a racist? Out of genuine curiosity. I'm always interested in hearing what people on the other side have to say. And he said, I really can't, because we deal with police officers on a regular basis. And just like you'll have bad lawyers, you'll have bad accountants, you'll have bad whatever, sometimes you get bad police officers.
Of course.
Who are power hungry and they're on a power trip and they do things bad for those reasons. And he said, I can't say that his motivation was race under these circumstances. So those are two separate issues. They were both lumped together immediately.
That was
and then
the
it resulted
narrative,
it resulted in this major issue regarding race. And that's where it was moving forward.
And BLM, which is from the get-go, this also was an unpopular opinion at the time. Like, I remember I was, this friend of
some
mine.
houses in California that are
Yeah,
some
some
mansions?
$6 million mansions that are like, yeah, they made a ton of money. But a friend of mine who's at the time, she had like a BLM sign in her yard. She had bought this house and it was on the fence when she bought it. And I would go there and be like, are you, like, is this going to stay up? She just like couldn't take it down because she was worried about what the neighbors would think. But she had taken over the house and like wanted to take it down. But that organization is admittedly a Marxist organization that
Right.
believes in like the destruction of the nuclear family and all of these things that are also are happening now as part of like this kind of woke DEI. It's a trend. I think it's something that happens at the end of a civilization when there's like a level of comfort that's achieved and people start looking for problems. It's like a decadence.
Yeah, and again reminds me of what we were talking about in terms of these bills where they paint it as one thing, but it's got this dark thing in the background. Because I was talking to a family member about this and mentioned a couple of things that you were saying about how they're Marxist and against the nuclear family unit. And they said, oh, but how could you be against Black Lives Matter? I get it.
Yeah,
the statement in and of itself, yes,
Yes.
we 100% agree.
Yeah.
But it would be like calling an organization, We Love Puppies, and then saying part of our policy is we beat nuns to death.
Yes, 100%.
It's you don't love puppies.
Well, they're brilliant at naming things and branding things.
Right, yeah.
Don't say gay.
Right, exactly.
Don't say gay. The Inflation Reduction Act, which is a spending bill that causes more inflation.
Well, we can give that to both sides too, because one of my favorites is the Firearm Owners Protection Act, 1986. Where
What's
the
that?
Hughes
I'm not
Amendment,
familiar with it.
Okay, so the Hughes Amendment in the Firearm Owners Protection Act made it unlawful for peasants like you and I to own fully automatic weapons manufactured post-May 1986. So the Firearm Owners Protection Act ensured that guys like you and I will never be able to own fully automatic weapons manufactured after May of 1986, which as a result, firearms that were relatively inexpensive before then are now incredibly expensive because every single one in existence that you or I can own has been in existence since before I was born. But yeah, the Firearm Owners Protection Act signed that into law, restrict our gun rights. Thank you, Ronald Reagan. So we see a lot of that in politics.
Yeah.
So I find this very interesting, running down the list from somebody who's traditionally on the left and
The other
what caused
one,
the shift.
the other thing on the list is the climate stuff, which is I'm not a scientist. I don't know. It seems like the climate is warming. It always has and always goes through these periods. It's probably there's probably human responsibility for some of it, but like I said about the slogan in that T-shirt at the beginning, that climate change alarmism is a scam, and it is. There's no way that we are going to switch over to wind and solar, and then that's going to replace fossil fuels. It's ridiculous. And anyone who's serious about, if they're serious and so alarmed about climate change, then they would believe in nuclear energy, which is clean and infinite. So ESG, which I mentioned, it's basically another like bludgeoning tool of great virtue. Like, are you pro or against the environment, Mike? Do you believe in like chemical pollution of streams or not? Like, those are the two choices. We can't have a discussion about this. It's another thing that's become an orthodoxy. Every grant for every scientist is decisively like a climate change grant. You can't get grant money. There was that professor at Georgia Tech who was run out of her job for having a variance in her opinion. But the idea that there's, that Miami is going to sink into the ocean, and every prediction that has been made is incorrect. And people like Al Gore and John Kerry are like, they need to fly around on private jets with their carbon footprint. Carbon's another thing that needs to be discussed, like the greening of the planet, and that CO2 is life. But that, these sort of very important elitists need to fly around on private jets, but everyone else should not be cooking with a gas stove and has to do their part.
Ride a bicycle to work.
Yeah, and it's just a total manipulation, and it's anti-intellectual. Also, there's no debate around it. You have like the leader of the movement is a child called Greta Thunberg. It was like this. I was listening to someone on a podcast who was talking about how ridiculous it is when a society starts to like worship a child, as if there's like this is like a very ancient primitive thing. It's like, oh, the wisdom of Greta. We have to listen to the children on climate change. Why?
Unfortunately, I barely know who she is. I don't have a whole lot
Oh,
to
then
add.
forget it. Don't even, yeah. Don't even forget it. It'll be like a waste of your
like
energy.
Such an old man with some of this stuff.
But yeah, she's the Swedish child.
Oh, I've heard of her.
Yeah.
I just don't know much about what she says, except for "How dare you?"
How dare you?
How dare you? I did hear.
And then there are the last thing, not to like go on about it, but if like, why did Barack Obama buy like a Martha's Vineyard compound for $14 million,
Sure.
like at sea level?
Yeah.
How does anyone get funding, like a 30-year mortgage?
They're not putting their money where their mouth is.
If you look at like financial models and what banks do, like if they would factor in for like if money is at stake, Nancy Pelosi bought a $35 million beachfront compound in Florida. She's apparently very alarmed about climate change and rising sea level.
Well, that kind of money is chump change for her. You know
Yeah.
that, right?
Of course.
With how she does in the stock market.
She's she's
That's just a few bucks. She keeps that in her sock.
yeah.
So that's another one. Anything else you could think of?
The turn-up policy was a disaster, and another instance in which there were leading scientific minds from top institutions like Stanford, like John Ioannidis, who were opposed to closing things based on turn-up from the very beginning, just like Florida and Sweden. But instead, there was a shutdown. So that level of control, and living in California where this went on and on and on,
Right.
and people were wearing potatoes. There was an instance, I went to the supermarket once at the end of this, and I'm on someone called me from work, and I don't usually like talk on the phone in public places, but I had to quickly take the call and tell the guy I would like speak to him the next day or something. And behind the counter at this place I go to every day, it's called Rainbow Acres, this woman behind the counter screamed at me. It was like, "Put your potato up." And I was just so over it at that point that I said something to her. I said something like watch the way you talk to the customers or something like that. And then I go back.
I'm
I had
sure
to-
she loves that.
Oh yeah. So then I go to the back to the supplement section where I have a friend there, this woman who works there, who gives treats to my dog, and I kind of chat with her when I'm there. And the owner of the store comes over, who also knows me, and she's like, she walks up, she goes, "You have to go apologize to her," to the
Really?
woman behind the counter. And I just said, "Absolutely not. I'm not apologizing to her. Were you there?" And then this woman chimed in who was not involved in the conversation, who was like shopping for something and eavesdropping and was wearing a socialism t-shirt.
Oh,
And she looked over and she said, "I saw the whole thing. And I was shaking from what he said. I almost couldn't order my food." And I just looked at her and I was like, "You have to like go home then and like go under your bed because you can't be in society."
it's like a Portlandia episode.
It was, yeah, it was ridiculous. That was like, and I went around the corner of the aisle to get away from this woman because I was going to say something. And the owner of the place was just like, "Don't say anything to her."
And so you're over there looking for Ashton Kutcher, figuring out if you're getting punked right now.
Yeah, well, that was like the height of the absurdity.
Yeah.
Of that whole thing. But just having people, unelected officials in charge of policy and enjoying the control of that, and having that policy not aligned with scientific data, but persisting with it and not being allowed to debate any of it. Like there are all these, getting back to this T-shirt and Trump and all of these issues, they're just taboos that cannot be touched and are not open for debate. And I feel like we have to debate all of these things, and they all have to be open for debate. And it's not conspiracy theory stuff or anything else. It's like, it's just having a free and open society.
Yeah. The free and open exchange of thoughts and ideas. That's how you arrive at these conclusions. Unfortunately, we've seen many instances over the last few years, as this has ramped up with this sort of shift that you're talking about, that certain ideas are suppressed and mocked and turn out to be 100% true.
Absolutely.
Or even if not 100% true, there's a lot of truth to it. Unfortunately, we don't see too many people on that side apologizing or coming out and admitting
That's
that
like
they
a
were wrong,
that's a
right?
really good that's a touchy subject for me because I feel like there has to be some kind of like truth and reconciliation around a lot of this stuff. I have people who didn't, some people who don't talk to me anymore because of what they perceive to be my views. There are people who didn't talk to me for periods of time and then started talking to me again. And they were wrong about almost all of this stuff.
because they thought you were a conspiracy theorist.
Yeah.
And then it turns out you weren't so off the rails after all.
Not
as
at all. I
things
wasn't
came out.
off the rails at all.
Yeah.
So I feel like there should be some recognition of that. Otherwise, it's impossible. Maybe not impossible, but it's really difficult to move forward. Like especially during the turn-up crisis and all of the actions that were taken and all of the impact that that had on people's lives and their kids and all of this stuff. And it's just supposed to be forgotten and swept under the rug, which is wrong. Like
Yeah.
there are some people who've come out and said like, "I was wrong about this and I'm sorry." Like I also feel a big part of that is I feel a loneliness and a disconnection, not just living here, but generally and culturally, because I don't have the same version of reality among my dwindling social circle. There's a loneliness to it because you're not living the same version of reality that somebody else is, or you're not even close. So,
Interesting social experiment is take a ride in Ubers in Los Angeles, California, and sort of see the way those people are thinking. I'd say that as of late, it's about 9-1 Trump supporters
Yeah.
from the people that'll actually talk. But there's 1 in 10.
And how many of those people are minorities?
Oh, a significant percentage.
Mhm.
A significant percentage. African Americans for Trump that I've spoken to.
Totally.
Uber drivers, ton of them. But there's 1 in 10 who just have total Trump derangement syndrome.
Yeah.
And there's nothing anybody could say to change their mind. They're very adamant about it. And sometimes I'll ask questions, just being a wise guy, acting like I don't know what I'm talking about.
unassuming,
Yeah.
yeah.
Just
Hey.
acting like I'm genuinely
Just
curious.
chewing the fat here.
Yeah. But other times, they're giving it to me and I didn't ask for it, and it's 4:30 in the morning and I'm just trying to get to Gold's and I'm like, all right, dude, just shut up. I don't feel like hearing
Yeah.
this right now. But it is overwhelming. Now, it's not necessarily great sampling, because when you have Uber drivers, these are people who are independent-minded because they're working for themselves. They're
For now.
self-made, hardworking kind of people. So it's a different class of people generally, I'd say. I don't think that that's a good sample of the population in general, but to see that many overwhelmingly in
Well,
California.
I can give you an example, and these are, this is all like, these are anecdotes, but my cleaning lady is this Mexican woman who I see sometimes in the mornings at the coffee place, and I speak Spanish with her, and she was like, the other day, she was like, I don't know if Trump's a racist, but this sucks. She's like, this Biden, this is terrible. Everything's so expensive. This really sucks, no?
Yeah.
Like, yeah, like she knows. And then the other interesting thing is it's fun being able to speak another language because it gives you access to all of these people and observations, but there's so many Salvadorans in LA. And I've spoken to them about Bukele, the president, not the new president, but the president that has
Yeah.
completely turned that country around.
Right.
And in this country is portrayed as like a dictator in this kind of leftist nonsense. But they love that man.
Oh, they love him. It's
He's
crazy.
completely cleaned up that country. There's one woman who runs the parking garage at my yoga studio who I've spoken to, and she doesn't like him.
Oh, really?
And I asked some of the other guys, and I thought, I was like, she probably has some family members in a gang, right?
Right.
And she's like, yeah.
They all got thrown
They got
in
locked
jail.
up.
Yeah.
Yeah. But it's incredible. Him and Milei in Argentina, Meloni in Italy, these aren't like right-wing racist fascists. These are populists that and they're nationalists.
Mm-hmm.
And I think Trump falls into that category. Vivek. I hope Trump chooses like something that'll make this a lot more palatable, or could, if he chooses like Tulsi Gabbard or someone like that as a vice president, then that's game changing in conversations with people. Like, how do you reconcile the cognitive dissonance of what you think Trump is with a female veteran from Hawaii, former Democrat, or whatever she is now, on a ticket with Trump, pushing for the same platform?
Who else would you think would be a good option?
I think Vivek is great. He's just he has such great energy, and he's so smart and considerate. And like during his campaign, he would bring young people in who were protesting him, that were climate activists and trans activists. He would literally invite them in, give them the microphone, let them speak, and let them be heard. And then he would respond and kindly disarm them.
Yeah.
And would remark about how great it was to, isn't this great that we can have this conversation here? So I love Vivek, but I think it sounds like Tulsi or Elise Stefanik. I feel like it should be Tulsi or Elise Stefanik. And then DeSantis was mentioned, and Kristi Noem. I think she'd be a terrible decision.
Why is that?
I think she's the kind
Palin
of
2.0.
I think she's the kind of women that women don't like.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
What about her?
I think she had an affair with Corey Lewandowski,
Oh, okay.
and she's like a.
I'm not up
Yeah.
on the gossip.
See how far I've gone into this?
Trump needs to hire you.
Yeah, I'm like
to make the picks. You don't want her.
But yeah, like
Who
Vivek
would
or
be
Tulsi.
some people? That was going to be my next question. Is who would be some people you wouldn't like? So I guess Noam is on the list of.
Yeah, and then
of
like
no's.
Tim Scott is kind of weird. I like Byron Donalds also, but it might be a little early for him. And I think for appealing to, I'm going to like go against what I said before with DEI or whatever, but I think on their own merits, they're great candidates. But I think there has to be some female energy there on the ticket with Trump to balance. I feel like someone like Tulsi would soften out the rough edges that Trump has.
Interesting. So, all in all, have you spoken to anybody and presented this sort of thing and had them come around eventually?
The biggest thing I would say was October 7th for Jewish
Okay.
friends
Gotcha.
that have seen this and seen the left's support, basically for, for Hamas. And we're horrified by it, and it's opened up. Like Bill Ackman is a good example of this. If you've followed what's been going on with him, the billionaire guy who runs Pershing, he woke up to there were all these demonstrations at Harvard. These like some factions of pro-Hamas, and they brought the presidents before Congress. So Claudine Gay and the two other Penn. It was Harvard, Penn, and I forgot what the third one was. But he went after Claudine Gay in Harvard. She was caught. She had plagiarized a lot of the publishing, the materials that she published, which were very thin, by the way, for someone who to become president of Harvard. So she was obviously she's a perfect example of a DEI hire. With the wrong, she went to Exeter Academy and Stanford. It's like of great privilege, and got that position. So anyway, Bill Ackman went after her and was lobbying the board of Harvard to remove her after this plagiarism thing came out. And then Business Insider went after Bill Ackman's wife, who is a Israeli PhD doctor who had incorrectly used like quotation marks in a footnote or something.
Oh no.
She wasn't taking someone else's material or
Right.
ideas and passing them off as her own. So this he had an awakening basically on Twitter and has been writing these like long treatises about this. And it's funny to watch someone have this realization, but he's still not there. Like he's still not completely there. So he's suing Business Insider.
Wow.
That published this slanderous article about his wife. Like, so they went after his family, basically.
Right.
So to see like his awakening, I wish he gives money to Democrats. I wish he's like still complaining about Biden. And I read his stuff and I'm just like, can you please just jump to
Right.
the other side and like stop this nonsense? And to see people like Bill Maher, who still like their identity is wrapped up in being a Democrat. What if like ridiculous to wrap yourself up in either party? I like Republican, Democrat. It doesn't mean a lot anymore.
Sure.
But I haven't on a personal level. It's just been Jewish friends that have post October 7th. They're just like, oh my God, like what's going on with young people and at universities here? And there's so much anti-Semitism and this has been supported by the left in this country. Like, am I going to vote for Trump? Like, is that? And I'm like, yeah.
Interesting. Were you highly religious in Jewish faith when
No.
you were growing up?
I was bar mitzvahed.
So I've got a friend like that, and he was Democrat for many years. Family's still staunch Democrat. He's sort of the outcast
Yeah.
for becoming on the right side of center. And he said that the more that he started to look into views that were right of center, and the more he started to believe in this stuff, the more he started to explore Christianity. Has that ever come up with you?
Not Christianity, but I've certainly spirituality. I think there's like a godlessness crisis, which is a big part of all of this, like woke. I probably shouldn't have used just the term DEI, but just this this woke movement. It's like a religious, like a kind of quasi-communist religious ideology thing, replacement for religion, I think.
How would you define woke? Because I don't know that I can. I feel like I know it when I see it, but I don't know that I could define woke.
Yeah,
Do you have a definition and parameters that you use?
Well, it's basically like become this ideology of viewing like a pyramid of disenfranchised groups in a hierarchy.
Okay. Caden, you want to help us out with that? What does woke mean?
So,
I'm sure definitions vary person to person, but I think you're on track with the pyramid thing. Yeah, if you want to describe a definition first, I can chime in after with my understanding of it.
yeah. So he's not, that's right on the mark, a pyramid of.
and that your race, your gender, all of those things are the determining factor in your experience in the world, and that it's the job of society and the government to correct these things.
And that takes the place of religion.
Yeah, I mean,
The government is the god.
these, and the other thing is like the oppressor-oppressed dichotomy, that every situation historically or presently can be looked at through that lens. There's a victim and an oppressor. And that's why like the Palestine-Israel conflict is just another branch in ideology of, the Palestinians are brown-skinned. The Israelis are also brown-skinned, by the way.
Right. Yeah.
But it's perceived that this is a colonialist, like a settler.
they're
and
they're
native.
viewed as white.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Even though like Sephardic Jews are similar to Arabs, and there are 2 million Arabs living in Israel also.
So the godlessness problem.
Oh yeah,
That's where we're.
and then yeah. So, and I personally have, since getting sober 7 years ago, it's something I'm not religious at all, but I think people need some kind of religion, something in their lives that gives a moral compass of some sort. I'm just thinking about like my own experience with this. I don't know, like it's impossible to know if there's a God or not.
Maybe we're talking about like scientifically proving something or mathematically proving something.
I like convince myself that there is and try to like surrender to it.
Yeah. I think it's also a misconception that if you're a thinking person, you can't reach that conclusion. I don't know why that's become the case, but there's been this picture painted that, intelligent people are atheists, and if you believe in God, then you're a stupid person.
Yeah.
And you're 100% right about the moral compass thing, because if everybody's inventing their own moral compass, then there's no such thing as right and wrong.
Yeah.
There's literally no such thing as right and wrong if everybody can make their own set of rules, right?
Yeah. I mean, the Western world is based on like Judeo-Christian ideals.
And I've been struggling with this lately because obviously my job involves politics to a large degree, whether it's with the law firm, because dealing with laws made through legislation, or with the program. We're talking about politics a great deal. And since I've been in California for a long period of time at this point, and I'm noticing the issues that they're having here in California. And not to say we don't have those in the city in Pennsylvania. We've got, problems in Philadelphia and such. But when you look at these problems that they're having, let's say in Philadelphia or in Los Angeles or in San Francisco, they do seem to have one thing in common, right? That they have Democrat leadership. Right?
Yes.
100%. But when you start to get down to the micro level, what I've been struggling with lately is what's going to change this and turn this around permanently going to be a change in political affiliation, or is it going to be leading people to Jesus? That's what I've been struggling with personally, because when I think about it like that, I sort of think that it's a little bit of a no-brainer, because of course, the policies that would be implemented that are more traditionally on the right, I think would dramatically help a lot of these places.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't think it would get to the root of the problem. As you're talking about, we've got a godlessness issue.
Yeah. I don't know how this resolves itself, because I think there's a denaturing that's happened generally with technology and industrialization of food, of everything, basically. And one of the things I mentioned, like the nuclear family, and looking at data on outcomes of people in, say, like fatherless homes. That's like the biggest determining factor in negative outcomes. But how do you turn that around? How do you, what could possibly be appealing to young people to bring them to like some kind of sense of spirituality? I think a lot of people are into like sort of Eastern mindfulness, meditation, but actual like Judeo-Christian religion is a tough, it's a tough sell.
Yeah, why is that?
I don't know. I think there's like the idea of happiness in our society is like, and with all of the social media stuff and following other people and looking at other people's stuff and people delaying biological processes, like women not having children or waiting until later in their life because they've have a different idea of what independence and empowerment is. But in so doing, like deny a biological imperative that maybe they want or don't realize that they want. But societally, it's become like, it's less important. But people are in the West are not having enough kids. There aren't enough marriages. And it's like a technological crisis when people are on dating apps and just like swiping and swiping. There's always something better. There's always something somewhere else. The idea of like having a family, having kids, building a life. There's like I guess a meaning crisis.
Instant gratification has become far too accessible in many different aspects. Do you think that's what it is?
Oh yeah. Yeah, 100%. It's like that movie Idiocracy. Did you see that?
Sure.
It's like a prophetic.
Great movie.
Yeah. Everyone, young people, like social media, pornography, food, fentanyl, all of this stuff is just like, it's terrible for human beings. Social media, like Instagram, it's like the lowest common denominator of human behavior. Just like complete, pure narcissism. The idea of going through life, like taking pictures of stuff. And like, I remember I went to Burning Man, like in 2006 or 7 or something. I would never go back there now. I hate Burning Man now. And Burning Man people, I find them insufferable. But I went there with one of my the friend I mentioned who like kind of opened my eyes to some of these things.
Wow.
And there was no Wi-Fi there or anything, and it was so much fun because everyone was just participating in the present moment. And I guess now there's Wi-Fi and social media. It was pre-social media.
Oh.
So now you just have like part of the human consciousness is like this hunting expedition for images or something to get some sort of affirmation from God knows who on social media or something.
Sure.
I don't really participate in it.
Yeah.
But that is like, it's horrible. Now there are all these influencers that are sort of pushing like alternate lifestyles to that one. And I think that gives rise to people like Andrew Tate. Are you familiar with him? Like
Yeah.
he's like the, who's probably, it seems is like he's like a woman trafficker.
Yeah.
Like,
It's a tough one because I see a lot of people on the right sort of give him props for going out there and going against the establishment in general and everything like that.
Sure.
And they think that he's being treated unfairly with his case and everything like that. I struggled with that a good bit because knowing that, I mean, his whole business model, from what I understand, was putting women on camera
yeah,
for porn
yeah.
and stuff. And I don't support that. So I don't think that that's somebody who I want to promote or condone. But that becomes kind of tough if he is being treated unfairly because he's a reprehensible human being, in our opinion, right?
Mm-hmm.
And if he's being dragged through the criminal justice system more as a result of that, we don't like this guy, we don't like what he's saying, well, that's a problem. Because even if I disagree with what he does, if he's not breaking the law, but they're using the criminal justice system against him, you really should stand up for him. But that'd be the guy that I'd be most likely to be like, well,
Yeah, I'm not going to
really
spend much.
Yeah, I'm not going to be too upset about it, but I feel like you almost have a responsibility to be more vocal about it if he is being treated unfairly. But anyway, I interrupted you with
No, I mean, I got to the subject of Andrew Tate. It
the
couldn't have been
extent
that
of my
important.
Andrew Tate knowledge.
Yeah.
The extent of my Andrew Tate knowledge.
But young guys are like responding to this stuff.
Gotcha.
Um,
Gotcha.
So there's like trying to find some kind of meaning.
Right. Yeah, I see what you mean about that. I would posit that there is a viable avenue for them to go down, but unfortunately, it's a difficult road, and everything in the Bible says it's going to be a difficult road, which it often seems to be confirmed in reality with the stuff that we're thinking about, and stuff that we're talking about. But the problem becomes when you have the people who will push it away, like we're saying, it's not an easy sell. Is the eventual outcome going to be people learning the hard way? Is that the only way for it to happen? And what is it going to take for people to learn the hard way?
I don't know. I think this is like the beginning of some sort of collapse and reforming of society.
Yeah.
I see most of these politicians. I was thinking today about Trump as like the gymnastics that a Christian person on the right wing has to do. Like I have to do them myself because he's culturally like doesn't fit with my like as values as a person, but also the idea that that Trump is like a Christian and a religious man and conservative. He's not like paying a porn star off. Like there are mental gymnastics on the right also to embrace this guy. Because he's not really one of them either.
Sure.
But I don't know. Yeah, I don't know what the solution is. I kind of like. Yeah, I kind of don't care.
The policies are. I think the way they get there is the policies are in line with what they would agree with. not the person themselves. You know?
Yeah. But I think we're too far down as far as the topic of religion and like bringing people back to it. I think Islam is probably doing pretty well. There are all those young people in the West like going to join ISIS and being sold like an alternative version of life in which, you know, obviously a disgusting one, but another, it's almost like a Grand Theft Auto option where they'll give you like a Kalashnikov and a couple €1,000 and like a couple of wives or something. There's this like bonkers kind of option.
Why is it that on the left they see Islam as more acceptable than Christianity?
Because Islam falls under the, erroneously so, falls under the category of like oppressed peoples. So any Muslim in the West is immediately like a victim of something, of Islamophobia, a fear of Islam. But that's the reason. It's ridiculous.
And then they get into like a Mexican standoff with the with the gay people, right? Because
yeah, and like so if you're a student out like a Hamas, and they're not all Hamas supporters, but
yeah, some people just don't want to see innocent.
It's so bizarre, like seeing young leftists defending and promoting a culture that is like so horrifically misogynist and like anti-women, anti-gay, anti-everything that they purportedly stand for.
Yeah.
They're like incredible defenders of those people. And then if this is all like, if any of these people went to Gaza or anywhere else and carried on the kind of lifestyle that they wanted in the West, they would be killed.
Yeah, dead, not hurt, not punished, not made fun of, dead.
But this is the part of immigration and where the West has lost. I think the West has lost confidence in itself. Doesn't believe in itself anymore. And that, like you can look at what's happening in the UK with all of these demonstrations and the loss of this. Also used to be something I would think be like, oh, these like right-wing fundamentalists are against any kind of immigration or cultural integration. But I think a lot of these illegal migration is destroying a lot of Western societies.
And they're seeing problems overseas with that stuff already, though, right?
Oh, yeah.
They're coming to fruition, and it's a shame. I really like having a liberal for Trump friend because I feel like it's almost like you're a spy. Like you can come over here and tell us all their secrets that you learned from a lifetime over there.
But we don't talk, I can't talk politics with anyone anymore.
Really?
Yeah.
Nobody on that side, at least.
I talk to my dad occasionally, and then it just turns into like, he's a New York Times print reader.
He's still on that side.
And he's just like, he kind of like still has this feeling that Joe Biden is like a Bill Clinton or something. And that it's still the same thing. It's like a continuity of the same thing.
I do have a buddy who I think is along those lines where I talk to him and we agree on 90% of everything. But he calls himself a Democrat. John F. Kennedy's not running anytime soon. You know that, right?
Yeah. Well, RFK is.
Yeah. Well, that's an entirely different ballgame, though, because they're trying to keep him off the ballot, right?
I thought he was running as an independent.
But they're giving him a hard time in many of the states. He's got lawsuits that he had to file and everything like that.
This is like
Trump too. So how do you feel about that? I'm trying to keep Trump off the ballot.
It's the same. It's part of the same movement of authoritarianism that any American who believes in a free and open society should be completely disgusted by and push back against. all of these, the 4 lawsuits against Trump I don't think any of them have any merit. There's a different standard for him versus like, look at the classified documents case where Joe Biden committed a similar, arguably more egregious crime and wasn't president, was vice president and previously senator, and was deemed unfit to stand trial because of his cognitive, but yet he's fit to be president. Like, this is real. This happened. Like, can you believe that?
Yeah, that's
But there's a different standard of justice, and they've weaponized the justice system to go after a political candidate, which I can't believe we're even talking about this as happening in America. This is like something you would read in the New York Times about somewhere else previously, and have this like pride of being, at least in this country, we don't do that. But they've crossed the line. Like, they've totally crossed the line. I was watching the Fannie Willis testimony
oh yeah.
this week, which was like hysterically funny, I thought.
Throw some campaign funds in with the cash. That's all.
Yeah, just and how her boyfriend or whoever that guy was, he had a cruise ship travel agent, and a regular travel agent. But to see someone like that, I mean, it's funny, but she's the district attorney of Atlanta.
Right.
Like, that woman is like unpresentable. And there's a commonality among, like, she seems like an idiot and an activist. They're all funded by the same person and movement. But him, the woman in New York, Alvin Bragg, there's like these low-rent prosecutors that got Soros money and got into office. The guy here in LA, Gascon, they're like pro-crime, pro-chaos DAs, and they're hacks.
Do you think that was an effective way to influence policy from a high level, is to
Oh, it's
go
like-
ahead and get involved in these elections rather than
Bang
the
for buck
legislature,
on
right?
like local, just win DA. Imagine like the outsized impact.
We don't have to change the law.
No, but just this, it's kind of
Change how
brilliant.
it's enforced.
Yeah. They've weaponized the justice system against a political candidate who was the president of this country. Like, and now what they're doing in the media is that the retribution that Trump will bring about if he wins, that's what we have to fear. Trump's retribution. Except it's like, where would the what would the retribution be for?
Yeah.
It's ridiculous. They've outed themselves for their own behavior, effectively.
Yeah, it's almost like in school when you're being reprimanded for almost hitting somebody back who hit you, right?
Yeah.
That kind of thing.
Yeah. It's like I punched him in the
Preemptively.
gut.
Yeah.
If he gets elected, he's going to retaliate.
He's going to retaliate.
We don't want me to
can't
get
have that.
hit.
Yeah, we can't have that happen.
But this is why I was saying, like, as far as truth and reconciliation, this has gone so far to the point that, we have these lawsuits and the Colorado thing, like trying to remove Trump from the ballot, to remove the candidate who has not been convicted of anything. How do you move forward with people like that? And how do you have any common ground without a reconciliation on any of these things? Otherwise, we're living in two different countries.
Yeah, I do feel like I'm crazy sometimes, don't you? Like when people aren't acknowledging some of this very basic fundamental stuff.
I took it for granted.
Yeah.
And so many insane things have happened with so much frequency that you just become desensitized to them, as if it has become normalized, I guess.
When you see what has happened to him, with them coming after him in all these different ways and coming after him so hard, I think there were a considerable amount of people who, after 2020, were considering moving on from Trump as the candidate, and thinking maybe it's time for somebody new.
Yeah.
And they revitalized him when they started doing all this stuff. when they busted into his place with the warrant, right, to search his place.
Yeah.
And people started to feel like he was being treated unfairly. And that really energized.
It backfired.
It really backfired.
Yeah.
And, right now they're at a sort of a do or die point. They're at the point of no return. Either they succeed in taking him down with this onslaught, but if they don't, it sure seems like he's going to win.
I mean, I hope so, but there's a lot of...
You never know. Yeah,
who
stuff that we
knows
can't
what
say.
these
Stuff that
people are
we
gonna
can't
do.
say.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I remembered what I was going to say before in terms of like crazy things happening with frequency that just get sort of like shrugged off. Joe Biden publicly in a press conference before Russia invaded Ukraine said that we would allow a limited Russian incursion into Ukraine.
Mm.
He gave permission for Putin to invade Ukraine publicly. Can you imagine if any other president did that? That is like, it's like, oh, it's a gaffe. He didn't mean that. Like, he just gave away the game.
Yeah.
It's so grave. Just that one incident, which is never talked about, by the way, in all of this discussion of funding, that there is no off-ramp or discussion of peace in Ukraine. Like, I'm not against giving money to Ukraine and defending them. I don't have any... There are all these delusional people on the right that have, like, bizarre kind of ideas about who Putin is.
Mm.
Why isn't there an off-ramp? Why isn't there a discussion of a peace process? Like, this has to be settled and it has to end.
Isn't that what Trump said too? He said, what do you want? I want people to stop dying?
Yeah, hundreds of thousands of people have died. This is just an endless... They're just throwing more and more weapons in there, and it's effectively a stalemate.
So you think at the end of the day, Trump is an old school Democrat when it comes down to it?
I don't know. Maybe like some version of a Democrat centrist.
Because that was people's gripe about him at the beginning on the right. Like, this guy's not a real conservative.
Yeah, but he seemed to. I don't see that as being an issue. I think the issue are swing voters in specific states. If women are going to vote for him, I thought he was going to win the last election handily, and I thought the midterms, the Republicans were going to sweep the elections, and I think abortion is still a problem for him. Even though I think in reality he's like a pro-choice with restrictions person, which is what most Americans are.
Yeah, that's an entirely different episode to get into
A series
to what that's all.
But
about.
it's going to be a problem.
Yeah,
That's like the one talking to women, like, and understandably so. That's at least that's could be the whole thing right there.
Now, there are people on the left who have said ridiculous things in terms of abortion, right? There's the Virginia guy who said you deliver the baby and then have a discussion with the mom about what happens. I mean, that's crazy. That's clearly killing a kid,
Yeah.
right? I don't think anybody's debating that's
Yeah.
killing a kid. They always bring up that 3 exceptions and everything like that. But if those were proposed, I don't think that would appease them anyhow. So it's a really lengthy discussion. But like we were talking about, they don't bring these standalone bills. They always add other things in there. It almost seems as if, okay, there are people who believe that it should be totally illegal. There are people who believe that it should be allowed no matter what, whenever. You would think that there could be an agreement that, okay, here's what we all agree is no good. Here's when we think you should not kill a kid. And here's where we're going to draw the line. Here's what we all agree about. But it doesn't seem like that's an option for anybody to reach that point where, okay, this is at least where we all agree it's no good.
Abortion is something where my views have let's just say adjusted. from one end, which was basically like abortion is just like a contraception. Like there's nothing to it. Just like, oh, it was a mistake. You can correct it right after. Like I'm pro-choice and in favor of bodily autonomy. But there has to be, this is like, I think it's what the restriction is, the first trimester or whatever, but I was listening to this, I went to this event for the Free Press, and this woman, Anna Kachayan, I think is her name, she does this podcast called The Red Scare, and she was talking about abortion, and that she's a liberal, and she had mentioned that she's pro-choice, she had an abortion, but it was a stain on her conscience. And I just thought that was like an interesting way to describe it.
Discouraging other people, even though she didn't think it should necessarily be illegal.
Yeah.
So as somebody who's on that side, I have a hard time understanding it. But at some point it becomes killing a life, right? So where do we draw that line, and how do people feel comfortable saying, okay, this is definitely the line? Because it would seem that that would be a mistake that you'd want to err on the side of caution, wouldn't you?
Yeah, I don't know. And then there's like the, the woman's right to choose aspect.
Yeah, but when you have a third party that's involved, right? If we're talking about this is now a life, you could choose a lot of things. You
Yeah,
could
I
choose
see.
to
I'll
take
tell you what,
pills. You can't choose
it's
to
a
kill
really
kid.
tough issue for me, but the shift that's occurred for me is that I previously thought of this in an unconscious way, I think.
Yeah.
And was just like, oh yeah, it's contraception. It's like, doesn't matter. You can just get rid,
Why do you think that
to
is, though?
actually
Why do
this is
people-
a wrong, like, it might be a necessary evil. And that it's fundamentally, it feels wrong. But that people should have the right at some point to choose. But I don't know, as you said, I don't know what the line is.
Yeah. Like if you were in the woods in the dark one night and you're shooting at what you think is a tree. I'm not sure if that's a human being. May or may not be a human being. You're probably not going to shoot at it, right?
Yeah. And then there's the whole discussion about birth control and like whether that has, first of all, it's bad for women.
Is
like
it?
totally ruins their hormones. It apparently makes them choose the wrong mate.
Oh, really?
Because it throws off their pheromones. But this woman called Louise Perry wrote this book called The Case Against the Sexual Revolution, in which the thesis is like how the pill has impacted lives and sexual relations, and this idea of delaying biology over and over and over again, and that people, not just women, are winding up unhappy as a result because they're just continuously carrying on in this individualistic kind of life that starts to bleed into people's 40s. And then they sort of, if it's a woman that maybe wanted to have a kid or something, or a family, they're waking up from this idea of feminism, and they've maybe foregone something that they wanted or didn't know that they wanted.
That goes back to something that you were talking about earlier, though. You know that, Jonathan.
What's that?
Godlessness, right?
Yeah.
Because all that's not possible. The whole liberation aspect, it doesn't jive with...
You don't think Samantha from Sex and the City was like a God-fearing woman?
If I knew anything about... If I'd seen an episode of that program, I might have some more intelligent insight on that.
Maybe there can be like a Christian version of Sex and the City.
Yeah.
Like-
Wait until everybody gets married in the city.
Yeah.
And it's knocked as like such an uptight lifestyle and everything like that. Like, oh, these people are nuts for doing X, Y, and Z. But it don't seem so bad when you look at how all this other stuff's turning out, going our own way,
I'm starting to, I think, arrive near that conclusion that that's what human beings are basically like meant to do.
Yeah.
And we're in this like decadent, hedonistic, endless search for individualistic satisfaction in some way that is like fundamentally narcissistic and denaturing for humans, and that you're probably supposed to just like, you're programmed to have, a family, support people, have like usefulness and meaning in your life from relationships with other people.
I feel like the world in general is very naive right now. When they're presenting this stuff, that we know better. I almost feel
Absolutely.
like when I look back on some of the things that I said to my dad when I was a teenager,
Yeah.
where he's trying to teach me things for my own good. I'm like, what does this guy know? I got it all figured out. I know better than you. You're not so smart, Dad. And I look back, 20 years later, and I'm like, yeah, he actually did know what he was talking about. I'd only been being around for only that many years didn't really lend itself to me having it all figured out the way I thought I did. And I feel like that's what the world is all about right now. I feel, in general, and not just younger people, just the population in general.
Yeah, that we're not.
We think we're the first
We've
ones
moved,
to have,
yes,
it
totally.
all figured out. And that's why we end up with socialism. Oh, no, we know how to do socialism the right way, right?
100%. We're like post-history. We've moved beyond. We're going to start over again. We're going to tear down all of the statues. We're going to reinvent like this. It's another utopia, which is destined for failure and violence and all of these things. What we have now or are losing now, I think, is the best version there is.
Yeah.
It's like some version of prosperity where you can sort of be left alone to pursue what you want in life. That's like the maximum for a human civilization with freedom.
Yeah.
But we've like, the train got to the station and we're just like, we're going to keep going. And it looks really ugly. I don't know if you saw the Google AI
Oh,
stuff that
yeah,
came
that's
out.
wild,
It's like
right?
everything is talk about like woke stuff.
Yeah, it's just...
When you put in like prompts for historical figures, they're like all diversified.
yeah.
And that's like a
It's
cultural...
historically inaccurate.
This is like exactly what... Do you know Camille Paglia is? The
No.
professor, feminist. She wrote the book Femme Persona. She's like a second wave feminist. She's brilliant. And I was watching this talk with her. I forget who was with, but she was talking about students currently with this idea of, I think people call it presentism, but viewing history through the lens of now and making like, if we could just use like a red magic marker to correct everything in history with, it's like, that is here and it's Google AI.
It's wild. Well, we're going to have you back for this. Glad to hear what it means to be a liberal for Trump. You're now a repeat offender, so what's another few times? You're officially part of the California version of the program.
Nice.
Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Mike.
We miss you, Ellie. Daddy loves you.